Ladies and gentlemen, next up is a mainstay of the annual Stakeholder event. It's a feature panel discussion. We have with us three knowledgeable participants who will weigh in on a topic that everyone here is keen to discuss: competitiveness in a changing economic landscape. First, I would like to introduce Mark Plamondon, the Executive Director of Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association. Mark's going to join us up on the stage. Come on up, Mark. Oh, come on, you can give him a round of applause. We're all very shy today. How about next up would be Malcolm Bruce, the CEO of Edmonton Global. Come on up, Malcolm. And Dan Seekings, the Vice President of Natural Resources Environment at Global Public Affairs. Dan. Okay, I want to start off with Mark and Malcolm. Actually, Malcolm, first off, for the folks that don't know what Edmonton Global is, can you tell them what it is?
It's not the television station.
It's not the television station, no.
So a couple of years back, the regional leadership around the Edmonton metropolitan region said, you know, we've achieved some great success on the policy front, land use, infrastructure, transit, and things like that, and we think we can export this up to economic development. So they gave me the task to go away and create an independent company that would look after regional level economic development based on a pay-to-play model. 15 member municipalities, including most of the Heartland membership, created Edmonton Global in 2017, and I was hired as the first CEO as of the 1st of July 2018. And our focus is on attracting more money in terms of investment and more jobs to the region.
And how are you working directly with the City of Edmonton?
So obviously they're a key partner, so EEDC, or the Edmonton Economic Development Corporation, is one of the many regional stakeholders that we're increasingly aligning and harmonizing with.
All right, Mark, let's go back to you here. The top question that I had here was, it sounds like a fairly simple one, but I don't necessarily think it is a simple one, and that is the Edmonton region competitive globally?
Thank you for the question, and I'm going to answer from the perspective of Alberta's industrial heartland. So I think, as I talked about earlier, and you're all aware, our association is all about promoting the competitive advantages of the region. So we're out internationally and we are talking with investors about the competitive advantages of the region. Low-cost feedstock is the #1 competitive advantage. We have tremendous infrastructure, pipeline networks, skilled workforce, a whole suite of advantages that make our region competitive. The issue we have is we have a number of disadvantages as well that need to be offset by all of the advantages. So main disadvantage of our region, of course, is its access to markets. We are located far away from large population bases that would consume the products that are produced in the heartland. The cost to get to the coast and then ship overseas is more significant than other jurisdictions, for sure. Our regulatory environment, I think, is not as streamlined as other jurisdictions. And we're also seeing in other jurisdictions very competitive investment attraction packages offered by the various governments. And so when you look at our competitive advantages against the disadvantages, when we ask the question, are we competitive? I need to look at the empirical facts. Where is capital flowing? So for me, competitiveness, one measure could be how profitable are our current companies, but large-scale companies like the ones operating in the heartland, once the assets are in the ground, you're operating on a marginal revenue to marginal cost basis. To me, the real measure is the next capital dollar for companies going into the industrial heartland or going into Canada? That, to me, is the measure of competitiveness. And if I look at the data over a number of years, so foreign direct investment is down significantly. And it's down to 1/3 of the peak levels just in 2007. Companies who have been operating in Alberta are now looking at the United States and Mexico for their growth. An example, TransCanada is changing its name to TC Energy. Specifically, they want to recognize that their growth in the United States and Mexico. I was at a energy roundtable conference in the fall. CEOs of significant Canadian companies were talking about how their next capital investments are all going into the United States. And we've seen graphs of the relative investment in Canada versus the United States in the petrochemical space. And the fact is, the proportionate share of investment into Canada is down significantly from what it has been over the last 5 years. And so that data is telling me that despite the competitive advantages that we have and the low-cost feedstock and versus some of the disadvantages, capital is flowing elsewhere, and there is something is needed to help bridge that gap.
Malcolm, do you want to touch on that question about our competitiveness?
So thanks very much, Jalen. I have to echo a lot of what Mark is saying. I'm really looking in markets. So I'm looking outside of the Canadian boundaries by and large. I'm looking at what's going out on the global stage, and when you look at where capital is flowing, it is not coming into this country by and large, and the numbers are proving that out. So I have a somewhat contrary opinion of what was being talked about this morning, which is very much an inward Alberta-looking focus, which is demonstrating there is some growth, there is some opportunities, there's some good news in the Alberta economy. But when you're looking at a little longer-term horizons, a number of those things that are going to continue to create the great wealth for this nation, which enhances Alberta's position and then subsequently the Edmonton metropolitan region, we don't see that necessarily as strong as it needs to be. And it goes all towards our competitiveness. What is our value proposition to the global markets? And right now, the global markets, if they think about Canada, think about its limitations, its constraints on investment. And Mark articulated them very well. And some of those things on a microcosm are things like, whether you agree with them or not, but they're impacting is things like minimum wage, carbon taxes, and this is what mid-sized enterprises are telling me on the street. They're saying these are the kind of things that are making us less competitive on a day-to-day basis in the immediacy. So these things are having a negative impact on our competitiveness globally. And whether we can square those circles is a question all of us need to be answering. And I know some of you are doing very well, and some are not doing so well, and you're hoping for the next sort of round of investment opportunities that come into the oil and gas space. And lastly, I would say that some of it also resides internally to our own domestic markets, is what we're calling investment readiness. So investment readiness is how quickly can we act or react to interest or opportunities that are presented in front of us. And to be honest with you, when I was listening to the Inter Pipeline this morning, their turnaround time is about 9 years to get a return on investment dollar. That is a huge amount of time to wait to get a return on dollars being invested by whatever company. As you know, our annual regulatory environment takes about 4 years for a big project to get an answer. In the United States, in Louisiana, it's 2 years, and you'll get an answer. And the Americans have an ability to pay for an accelerated process where you physically, as the company, hire the FTE, and they'll hand carry your file through the regulatory system. So you follow the entire system, it's just on a regulatory, on an accelerated process. We don't have that yet in places like Canada. So these are the kind of things that we need to do to help create, I think, a little better competitiveness from our perspective.
Dan, I know I've been watching you listen intently to both of the answers to that question. You're nodding your head. What did you want to add?
Sure, just a couple of things. One, I think one of the factors is we have seen in the resource sector, particularly the oil and gas sector, we have seen the United States of America go from being our biggest and best customer in oil and gas to our biggest competitor. And that's, of course, a disadvantage in that it shut us a lot of, but it's also an opportunity, which, of course, we need to take advantage of, and I see people are trying to do that, but it's going to take time. Second point is to echo what Malcolm said, is when I talk to the CEOs and our clients, particularly the multinationals, they make this point time and time again. They go to Fairfax, they go to Houston, they go to London, wherever they go to get funding for their projects. They're competing for funding all around the world for other projects. And the answer is, how long is it going to take before we get paid back in Canada? And it just takes too long. It's just not acceptable. And so we do have a serious competitiveness issue in this country.
So to follow up, and here we go, gentlemen. Here's the $1 million or $5 billion question. Really, what is it going to take then to increase our competitiveness? I think there's probably a shopping list this long.
Sure there is. There's lots of things that need to be addressed. I want to start with, right now, that the gap in competitiveness in Alberta, part of that gap can be closed with government support. So to the government of Alberta, they have put forward 3 programs: the partial upgrading PDP, the Petrochemical Diversification Program, and the Petrochemical Feedstock Infrastructure Program. All 3 of those programs are meant to close that gap between sort of the competitiveness or the return on investment associated with investing here versus investing in another jurisdiction. And again, some of the hurdles we need to get over here in Canada are very difficult. It's winter. We have winter here. We need to have a capital build. Our capital costs will likely be slightly higher. Our transport to market is going to be higher. We have some structural disadvantages that we need help getting over if we're going to see investment here in the industrial heartland. And so the PDP program and the PFIT program for the government of Alberta, that is intended to help get over that gap. But for continuous improvement of that program, I'd say one of the weaknesses of that program is that is a program that will help 1 or 2 companies or whatever is selected out of, say, the 15 or 20 that apply. So you're helping 1 or 2 companies with that competitiveness gap, but of all the interest in the heartland, you may have another number of companies that would like to invest, but they can't get over that gap, and the additional support would be needed. But the program is full with the intake period that we've had. So one of the things that we suggest, and when we're talking about how to help with competitiveness, we suggest that the program, the PDP program, et cetera, continuous improvement, we look at making that a framework where you want to incent, say, methane or ethane or propane or whatever it is you want to incent for value add. You want to incent how many jobs, you want to incent diversification of the workforce. Whatever it is that you want to incent, those things are all provided, but once all those boxes are checked, there is a certain incentive associated with that. And in most cases, the tax flow and the benefit with the capital build will offset the incentive that is then later received during operation. So we view this as a fairly low-risk approach to incentive, and that would allow more companies access to close that gap between some of the profitability of their organization if they invested elsewhere versus here.
What's reaction been to that?
Well, when we talk with individuals, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the implications of implementing a program like that has complications and certainly political complications and needs to be thought through. But we think as a continuous improvement of the support for large-scale petrochemical investment, we are in favor of moving it towards a framework which still incents the things you want to incent, but allows for certainty in receiving those incentives. Whereas right now, it's great that there's a program, but once you do all that work, there's still only a chance as opposed to certainty that you'll receive those incentives.
All right, Malcolm, your thoughts on this?
So to follow on, I think diversification of our markets, which is a common theme that the province of Alberta is working very hard on, which I completely support. And I think the challenges are the investment dollars necessary to open up some of those markets, as well as the political capital nationally we need to invest. Like, how much effort are we putting into the Asian Pacific region? How much time, effort, and energy, and where we're going to put that we need to continue to reinforce. But there's some simple solutions. I'm not talking about new money. So the federal government declared in 2015, when they were going to run a deficit, that money would be going into infrastructure development. So we could accelerate infrastructure development to help the supply chains and logistics of all our goods and services and moving them to tidal waters and the like. But if latest reports are to believe, the deficit, 90% actually is being spent on sort of operational needs, and 10% is going for infrastructure. So my suggestion is we just shift that balance a little bit, so we start investing additional monies. Like our good friends from Prince Rupert are here. I'm sure they'd love to see some capital investment going in so we could increase the size of that port there. Vancouver congestion. All these things that will enable us to move additional goods and services to various places. And then my second point goes back to this investment readiness, is trying to elevate our own game as part of our value proposition to folks to say, we can increase the tempo of approvals and investment decisions and de-risking your decision so the company can get, can say, okay, we're good to go. This is where we're going to be.
Dan, your thoughts on what Mark and Malcolm have said on this and competitiveness?
A couple of points, and I apologize, I'm speaking these from the federal level, so bear that with me. Don't stone me when I leave for that, just because I'm from Ottawa, that is. Market access is critical. So we need TMX, we need Line 3. We need those not just to get the raw commodity out and the dilbit out, but the more, and I don't mean this to be anything against what Premier Notley just talked about and is trying to do, but the more trains we put on the rails, the more congested it becomes. So how do we move grain? How do we move pellets? How are we going to move the products that we're getting from the Heartland out? So we need pipelines to get to market access to improve our competitiveness, one. Two, back to my earlier point about timelines, we need clarity on Indigenous consultation. We need clarity on some of the environmental issues. C-69, I get frustrated in Ottawa with the justice lawyers. Their view is case law sells everything. Now, I'm a geologist, sorry, I shouldn't be talking about law, I recognize that. But I do understand that there is a way of putting definitions in legislation so that legislation moves faster and smoother and you don't have to constantly be going to courts. It's just very frustrating that there are several things like that, and I'm not suggesting that these aren't important. Environmental assessment is important. Climate change is important. Our Indigenous community, they want to be part of economic reconciliation, but we've got to find a way of doing this much faster, much more streamlined, and I see this as a role of the federal government to show leadership in this.
Let's talk about those elections that are coming up, and I want to split them into provincial and federal. We know provincial election, I think, what is it? It was March 18th, the throne speech. We could be going to the polls. Speculation is April 16th. On a provincial level, Dan, how do you believe that the provincial election could impact Alberta's competitiveness?
It's a good question. I will say that we need a couple of cautions to note. One, when the government is elected, it's not like a light switch changing. The economic policies are not going to change just overnight. You only need to look at Ontario and what Doug Ford has found himself. So it doesn't work quite that way. Two, as you can tell from my gray and no hair, I've been through a lot of years of energy policy or regulatory business cycles. And the economic cycle and the business cycle the election cycle and the business cycle don't always match, unfortunately. We can see that in the States with thermal coal. Mr. Trump has loosened all the regulations. They've probably never been better. But my understanding is thermal coal production continues to decline. So I just caution that just changing that, it isn't going to happen that fast, and you need to moderate. Having said that, I think that with the two elections upcoming, this is an opportunity for people to express and to get into our political system. They are looking for policies and make the point about what needs to be, what the changes that we need, the kind of things we need, and the kind of considerations and policies that should be put in place.
Malcolm, Mark, do either of you want to weigh in on that question?
Sure. I think the regardless of who is in power post the election, there's a couple realities. The first thing, we're moving to a knowledge-based economy. Right? That is a reality, and that move to a knowledge-based economy is occurring globally, whether we want to accept it or not. And if we want to be left behind, then we will try and move away from that. If we want to stay at the forefront of the innovation that's going on in the petrochem space, oil and gas, food and agriculture, all these sectors that we have some real opportunity, including artificial intelligence right in this region, we need to make sure that we continue down that train, and we need to accelerate it, and we need to start to reinforce it far more significantly, just because that's where we've got to go, or we're going to start falling behind. And the other thing is we've got to come to a plan on carbon. Like, whether you are on one side of the question or the other, it's obviously a concern and an issue for the public, and we need to come up with something that we can all rally around and just get behind and do. the uncertainty around changing governments and something around carbon, I don't think is being very helpful for any of us, because as you know, uncertainty, particularly in the business climate, continues to draw us down. So if we can create some certainty in some of these bigger issues, I think we'll be far better off going forward.
It's something that we could all rally behind, get behind. I think that's another $1 million question there. I don't know what that looks like. What does that look like, Dan? Yeah, I throw you there. It is something that is up for debate right across the country. People are for it. People are against it. Certainly out here, it's not very popular, but it is on the forefront of the governments. What do we do about it?
Well, it's a good question. I don't have a simple answer what to do about it. I mean, it's clear that on the climate change front, this government, the federal government, was elected with that as its mandate, and it's going to proceed. I mean, anybody that hopes that somehow Catherine McKenna is going to back down, I don't expect that. Nor, quite frankly, on C-69 do I expect it. Was part of their platform. They are going to proceed, so it's going to come. The question is, can the provincial governments, can industry, because from time to time industry associations can have an influence, do have an influence, I should say, in how these things are worded, how these things are implemented. Because in the end, it's the implementation that's the critical factor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to make a comment on that. You know, with respect to new capital investment in the industrial heartland, and with the output-based allocation system, which is the carbon tax framework in Alberta, for new capital investment, because new investments will be using best available technology, the impact of the carbon tax for new petrochemical facilities is not a deterrent for investment here, for new investment. There's a couple of caveats to that, though. One is the way it's laid out right now is there will be a tightening of those allocations as we go forward, and so that creates some uncertainty going forward. But for incumbents, for current operations, there becomes more risk associated with that, because the output-based allocations would either be based on best technology or some other formula that would put a potentially a higher cost impact on the incumbents that are here. But for new investment, which again, when I'm talking about competitiveness and measuring that as the drive for new investment dollars here, the current output-based allocation I don't think is a deterrent at this point, the way it's modeled.
Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot again here with a question that wasn't on the list. Certainly over the past number of months, I'm hearing, certainly on my radio show, on the TV stations, that it feels like Alberta, what is happening here as far as the challenges that we're having with oil and in the industry is not being heard necessarily elsewhere. We heard the Premier talk about some numbers coming up, 4 and 10 up to 6 and 10, 7 and 10, that sort of thing. I'm an Ontario girl originally. When I talk to my folks back home, I swear to God, they think that Alberta, everything is paved in gold still, and everything is running tickety-boo. Is the anger that is out here right now, the frustration on a lot of fronts, being heard in Ontario? What are people saying there in Ottawa? What is the reaction there to what, the rallies that we're having, all day long rallies, the anger, the frustration?
There's a bit of a mixed reception. There's a recognition that it's there, and we need to remember that coming out of, Fort McMurray, I don't know if it still does, but it used to have the largest population of Newfoundlanders outside of Newfoundland. And a lot of the folks that were here during the good times have gone home. And so there is a sense that this oil and gas industry is a national industry, but it's not as prevalent as it should be. I think, as you begin to see the numbers, and I think actually I commend the government of Alberta. There's some ads that I'm seeing in Ontario, make it very clear the benefits of the TMX line, of the benefits to the economy of Canada, to the GDP of Canada, of oil and gas production. And those are a bit surprising to the average Ontario citizen. In fact, I'd even suggest they're probably a bit surprising to the average Ontario MP. We need to remember that, and that, sorry to say Ontario, but the point is that's the largest block of MPs in the country. So they are the ones that you kind of need to reach to get them to understand the significance And where it's happened, I know Mark and some of the others have been in and met with people like John Maloney, who's chair of the National Resources Committee, and he said to me, Dan, I want people to know that I'm an Ontario MP, but I'm really interested in this sector. Have them come and see me. I want to learn more about it. So it's a mixed answer. To the average person, it's probably not very significant, but there are some good ads, public ads that are raising the awareness. Certainly, there'll be select bureaucrats in Ottawa, finance, department officials, NRCan officials, they will very much aware of it. But it's not as, I know it's frustrating to you folks here, and again, please don't stone me because I'm saying this, but there's a lot of other voices in the country, and it's hard to get ours heard. And it's there, but it's not as loud as I think it needs to be.
Okay, well, how do we get that voice heard? Like, how much louder do we have to be? What do we have to do?
So, Jaylyn, I think it goes back to, like everything else, there's a lot of noise in there. So you need persistence, you need ongoing sort of engagement, and you need to spend time at it. You know, one of the things anybody will tell you dealing in the Asian Pacific region is you just can't go in there, make a deal, and come back, and then, you know, everything's beer and coffee afterwards. You really need to be persistent. You need to develop the relationship. Same thing goes for here. 3 years ago, I was sitting in front of the Standing Senate Committee on Transportation and Communication talking about pipelines. And I used an example when I was in Iraq in 2006, and if anybody knows of the Iraqi situation in 2006, I will say it was fairly sobering. But we spent blood and treasure hardening the pipeline from the southern oil fields in Iraq to Qasr, their Tidewater port, so Iraqis could get 1.2 million barrels of oil to fair markets every single day. And my question to the Senate was, you know, the Iraqis get it, why can't we? And I still, this is 3 years later, and we still haven't been able to move this yardstick as much as we need to. So people are doing the right things, but we still can't get to a decision. So this persistent engagement is what's critical, so it becomes front and center of the mind. Energy industry is $118 billion. I mean, that's a significant GDP needle mover.
Influence changes to improve our competitiveness. That's he's touching on it. What else is there?
Well, absolutely, and so to share with you what we have been doing, you know, we've been focusing on aligning with other stakeholders in the region with similar objectives and consistent messages, and our approach to Ottawa has been a sort of a long game, aligning with our partners and raising awareness of the importance of the industrial heartland to Canada as a whole. But that is a long game. That takes a long time. But we are seeing traction in NRCan. They have expressed interest in learning more about this. We've also proposing, not just coming to the door with all the problems, but proposing solutions on what things could be done to try to help competitiveness. You know, one of the consistent themes during the fall or the pre-budget consultations that a lot of stakeholder groups brought to the table, the federal government, was, look, we need to improve our ability to write off equipment right away, to get the tax benefit right away, which is the capital cost allowance. And the federal government heard this consistent messages from a number of groups. We were one of them, but a lot of other stakeholders in the room were also part of this. And in the fall economic update, the federal government did indicate that they are going to be looking at moving to 100% capital cost allowance, which helps companies when investing their capital dollar, assuming they have profitable operations already in Canada, they can get immediate write-down of that capital investment. If you don't have operations here, you now need to look at the entire depreciation of your other assets. The impact is not clear, but certainly if you have assets operating in this country and you're investing additional assets in a petrochemical facility, that 100% capital cost allowance is a good thing. So our approach is we want to have consistent messaging across broad groups, but messaging that includes suggested solutions. And then let's get into Ottawa and have conversations around solutions. And you know, I think we've been focused on that.
You can't just go in and complain. Can't just go in and complain. That we all know that doesn't work anywhere.
Absolutely, and that, Mark, you're right on. I mean, certainly, in my experience, I was a chief of staff for my sins in a federal minister's office, and you come in with a problem. Well, I've got an in basket with 550 problems. You come in with a problem and a solution. Now I'm interested. I also just want to go back to the earlier point about, and I don't want to leave the impression Ottawa's tone deaf, because in October of 15, when Trudeau was elected, he had no intention of buying a pipeline. And yet he owns one today. It is getting through. I know it's frustrating because the business cycle is so much short. You guys can't afford it. You can't afford it. It's frustrating to have to wait. But Mark's right and Malcolm's right. It's persistent communication and education that's needed, and that's how we move this stuff forward. So another quick example, oil sands. CAP, 3 or 4 years, well, a few years ago, started this campaign on this supply chain, and started categorizing which MPs have which supplies that end up involved in oil sands in their ridings, right across the country, in Quebec, in the Maritimes, in Ontario. Profound effect at that point in time in influencing the members of Parliament to realize, gee, I got people that are working in my riding. I better be careful how I vote on some of these issues. So persistence it's painful, but it's necessary.
Malcolm, Mark, anything else you wanted to add?
I also think, the angry Albertan sort of pops into my head when you're talking about Ottawa and stuff. And I thought, the pre-budget
Hey, you
submission.
come read my text line at the radio station anytime.
When I was watching the pre-budget submission, it was really good to watch AIHA present, right? It was bilingual, it was calm, it had a lot of really poignant sort of points that went into that pre-budget, which some have now been picked up as part of their consultation and input. So those are the kind of solutions that sort of resonate. I think the PDTP program from the provincial government is demonstrating a very firm way of which they're trying to enhance and incentivize additional parts to go in here. But we need the whole team pulling in the same direction. And I think the Premier's comments about, about how we're not playing nice in the sandbox right now is essentially true. I mean, we need to create this understanding of what is Canada, what is important to Canada, and if we all work together, we can afford it. And I'm going to give you one small example, which most Canadians, we laugh, ironically about some of the things going on down at the U.S., but 5 years ago, Western Canada provided 100% of the natural gas in Ontario and Quebec. Today it's 50%. And in 5 years' time, it may be as little as 0. Because most of the natural gas is being provided now up into those provinces from the Northeast. So they don't like the Trump policies potentially and all this other thing, but they don't mind the results of what those Trump policies are that are producing cheap gas at market value. So for us, we need to figure out, okay, in 5 years' time, where are we going to be marketing our gas? And if it's not going south, then it's got to be going somewhere. It's not going east, it's not going south, it's got to go somewhere else. So we need to build those capacities looking longer term about where we're going to start putting some of this stuff.
Mark?
Well, I was just going to add a comment that, I was mentioning that, what we've been trying to do is align with other stakeholders and get our messages into Ottawa. And it sounds great that we have seen some recognition of the issues, but to be clear, there's a lot of risks on the horizon. I mean, Clean Fuel Standard is a perfect example. The Clean Fuel Standard is a significant risk for the industries in Alberta. So the approach that we're taking, we have seen some success with that. Is that going to be able to continue and help us with such things coming down the pipeline like the Clean Fuel Standard? I don't know, but that is an example how, we've seen some progress in some areas, but if the Clean Fuel Standard goes ahead as contemplated, and I know there's still lots of discussion on that yet, that's a big risk for Alberta as a whole, I'd say.
We're just about ready to wrap up. So as we've talked about this for the past 30 minutes and kind of what we need to do, how we can do better. We heard you, Mark, talking this morning about the things that we are doing well and what we're looking forward to. Maybe let's look ahead and maybe leave this conversation on a bit of a positive note on what we're doing, where we're going, and the future of the industry in Alberta right now.
Yeah, glad to talk about that. So when I was talking this morning, I left with a positive note around, look, we see $30 billion of investment in the industrial heartland by 2030. We think that's a real possibility. We caveat that with the comment, typically we say, that has to be under the right investment conditions, right? So the opportunity is there. I believe the companies are interested in the feedstock that is available here. The long-term outlook for feedstock here from a petrochemical perspective is very encouraging and very competitive. So we're very optimistic about how the world could look for the Heartland, but that gap needs to be closed. Government plays a role to close that gap for sure, because the supports and incentives to get companies here versus other jurisdictions absolutely has to be there. Otherwise, capital will flow to the jurisdiction which provides the highest return on investment, highest risk-adjusted return on investment. And there certainly are risks here with the uncertainty in the regulatory environment in some cases. So we look at methane, ethane, propane, especially chemicals, partial upgrading. We say, wow, there's a whole suite of bona fide opportunities in the Heartland. We think all these are real opportunities, but the investment conditions need to be there, and both provincial and federal governments play a role there for sure.
Okay, positive, eh? Okay. Actually, there's a couple of things that I really think are pretty exciting to watch. First of all, in the technology space that's going on in particular this province and in other parts of Canada is very exciting. And what I really like about it in this particular province is what you're seeing is being infused into some of those what I would call traditional industries. So food and agriculture, petrochemical space, oil and gas, health, and all these other things. These are becoming world leaders, and what we want to eventually become is the destination of choice when people are looking best in class or best practice in some of these things. So how do you create that infusion of technology with those? And I think that's very exciting about what's going on right now in that space. And I think the other thing is that we continue to produce some of the smartest, most capable people out of our education systems across the planet. And these folks, if given the opportunity, are doing amazing and tremendous things. And so if we continue to support that innovation amongst the young people and continue to support them, I think our future is very bright.
Dan?
Let me just say, we've been kind of talking about the negative of competitiveness, but we have had some success. Mark pointed out that in the fall economic update, the finance minister announced some recognition of ACCA, capital cost allowance. That would not have been in their minds. If you look at their election platform 3.5, almost 4 years ago, that was not the kind of thing they were thinking about. But a good, aggressive campaign by a whole lot of companies, by individuals, by the provinces, by the Chambers of Commerce, Business Council of Canada, got us at least part way. And I noticed this morning watching the news, the finance minister was being briefed or being scrummed before he went into the cabinet meeting in Sherbrooke, Quebec. And he made the comment, well, the 2019 budget, we want it to be about families. We want to be able to have families better in 2019 than they were in 2015. Well, that gives me some hope, because my thinking is the only way families get better is everybody has jobs and income goes up. That means we have to be more competitive as a country if we're going to attract that. So there are some signs of encouragement, of positive, and I think we just need to keep moving in that, keep that kind of pressure on.
Mark Plamondon, Dan Seekings, Malcolm Bruce joining us on stage this afternoon. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.